Thank you, Pier Giuseppe. And as tradition has it, I'm going to share with you what the conference is going to hold for you. So after what Professor Apollone and Professor Pellici already know what is going to be said. But before I start sharing with you about the speakers who are going to take the floor as of tomorrow, I'd like to refer to past conferences. As I said earlier on, I am a genetist. I work at the University of Milan, and my cooperation with Professor Veronesi started off in 2004 when together we decided to cooperate at this major project because both of us thought that scientists should explain and disseminate to the society at large the result of scientific research. So such results should be taken away from the lab to the people. I believe this is a duty for all individual researchers. And here you see the list of the 12 editions that have taken place so far, and I'm going to go through them now very rapidly. And these are our travel companions, Mr. Marco Cionchetti Provera, myself, Kathleen Kennedy, Professor Veronesi, and Professor Bazzoli. The three foundations jointly, together with the program committees that changed over the years, these people together, again, as I was saying, made these conferences possible. Conferences that we have been offering over the years. We've offered such conferences to the civil society at large. We have advertise, as it were, these conferences at schools because we thought that young people, schoolgoers, are the most important target so that they would learn about the result of research. And then we also informed entrepreneurs, the civil society at large, as I was saying, about these program of conferences. And we did as much also with media and journalists because communication takes place through media, newspapers, radio, and the internet, of course. So we thought it important to disseminate the result of research through all media. And by the way, let me thank all the journalists that have been following us over the years. So the first edition of the Future of Science, and here you see Professor Veronesi together with Mr. Giuliano Amato, who has been following our conferences for many years. Well, that was an introductory conference. I'd like to go through them because if you look at our website, thefutureofscience.org, looking at the archive, you can click over the different conferences and listen to different presentations that were made. Many years have gone by, and yet many of these speeches are most meaningful. So here you have Professor Veronesi with Mr. Amato. Science and Society, it was the title of this edition, and there was very much an introduction of what we meant to do. Many sessions were devoted to science, but there were other lectures that were devoted to the relationship between science and religion, science and politics, science and business. So the relationship basically was analyzed between science and three important powers that can bear importantly on science proper. And then we moved on to another subject. Here you see two editions, one devoted to evolution and one devoted to the energy challenge. Evolution, if I remember correctly, has been perhaps the conference that is closest to my heart. Why is that? Well, because we started talking over the different sessions of the Big Bang, We talked about artificial minds. And in 2006, we hosted astrophysics, molecular biologists studying evolution. There were physicists studying artificial intelligence. And then, as is the tradition at our conference, we also had philosophers that could develop that kind of link among the different subjects. There was a large attendance. I couldn't find the right picture, but there were many, many young people sitting on the floor because the seats were not enough. And then we had the energy challenge. And that, again, is a most topical subject. We talked about energy. You see a most important speaker, Professor Carlo Rubbia. And that takes us to Food and Water for Life and the DNA Revolution. Well, in the first of these two, we talked about food and water, of course, and there we understood that these account for the greatest emergence worldwide. Oil is not the greatest emergence. The greatest emergence, indeed, the greatest problem, the greatest lack we have is food and water. There are countries that enjoy no water, and you know that without water, nothing can be achieved. It is the so-called blue gold. And this links very nicely with food. Indeed, there are many countries that do not produce enough food resources. There are many countries affected by droughts. There are countries such as China that are affected by a chronic scarcity of water to produce what is required by their inhabitants. So we talked about virtual water. And what is virtual water? Well, if to produce 1 kilogram of rice, you need 1,000 liters, and you don't have those 1,000 liters, well, I can shift production somewhere else. What China is doing, for example, you can use Africa to grow your rice, so you can grow your rice in Africa. So every kilo of rice that I import is very much as if I would import 1,000 liters of water. This is the very concept of virtual rice. This is something very important. This is something that affects us all and that we should bear in mind. Well, next year, as we were saying earlier on, we talked about the DNA revolution. We just heard from Professor Pellicci that the revolution of DNA changed research dramatically. Craig Venter took the floor then. I don't know whether you're familiar with Craig Venter, but he has been the top innovator. At the times, there were two teams trying to obtain the sequencing of human genome. Well, one was publicly funded and the other was privately funded because it used to be a public financer. Then he started his own company, and then they obtained the DNA sequencing. And he came to us and tell us about his work, but they were studying at the time something else, in that to penetrate the true mysteries of the life of a cell, Venter said, we should try and look to simplifying its functioning, to identify the individual bricks so as to build it up again and to develop an artificial, a synthetic cell. So in that edition of the Future of Science, if you listen to the different speeches, you might think they're obsolete, but to what extent that changed everything? Well, you can realize that if you listen to the proceedings of the DNA revolution. Then on the next year, 2010, we talked about the viruses, the invisible enemy, and they are amongst us. We can't see them. We know that there are many diseases that are caused by viruses, and not just to humans. There are viruses for plants. There are viruses for animals. And we talked about viruses as they're extremely complex. Luc Montagnier was among the speakers, as well as Robert Gallo. Montagnier and Gallo came to us. I don't know whether you know or you're familiar with their background. Montagnier was awarded the Nobel Award for the discovery of the AIDS virus, but the same discovery had been made also by Robert Gallo. And after Montagnier being awarded the Nobel Prize, well, the two were not great friends, as you can very well understand. As a matter of fact, they were true enemies. But when they came to us, when they came here, a few years had already gone by, and the Cini Foundation probably had conveyed some kind of harmony, so that eventually they have shaken hands and they made peace. I don't know what happened afterwards, but at least they shook hands. They seemed quite at peace, at least, in that picture. This is another beautiful photograph. You see Shireen Ebadi and Rita Levi Montalcini. They have attended quite a number of our conferences. And then we talked about mind, the essence of humanity. So we devoted that edition again to the mind and to all what was known about the mind and its circuits. Well, mind, from the molecular perspective, is very little known. We know something, but not very much. And there's a major international project underway that has been targeted indeed to the discovery of the molecular processes that they can trigger certain diseases, such as schizophrenia, autism, and so on and so forth. There are many, many of these diseases. The Alzheimer disease, Parkinson disease. There are indeed many diseases that are causing major problems. Then there has been the edition of 2012 devoted to the Nanoscience Society. Nanotechnologies are part and parcel of our society. On the internet, there are robots, as I've seen, that are quite awesome. iCube was presented here. You've probably seen it in the picture that we showed earlier on. It looked like a little cup, like a baby that was learning things. Yesterday, I read on the internet that there are robots that have different levels. There's one that can assemble, for example, to another one and grow increasingly so as to acquire greater and greater skills. At the Cini Foundation, we presented an important project, the Watson project of IBM, Watson being a major computer that can learn. And we had been told at the time that this computer was learning about medicine. He was being educated. There were professors that were holding lectures, and the computer was learning. And consider that, because I'm going to go back to that later on. By the way, let's not forget something that we have done for a number of editions. We held an important concert at the Scuola Grande di San Rocco. Concerts that have been greatly appreciated. Our concerts were all directed by Umberto Veronesi, or conducted by Umberto Veronesi. And then another very important edition devoted to the secrets of longevity. Elizabeth Blackburn attended. She was awarded the Nobel Prize in 2009, and she was with us for 2 editions. And she was awarded that because of her studies on telomeres, telomeres being the end part of molecules, and these telomeres getting shorter and shorter lead to the instability of chromosomes. So the shortening of telomeres has a number of consequences. So Blackburn studies on how to keep telomeres unchanged, not to have them shortened, might have some repercussions on longevity. Not only have we dealt this issue from this perspective, indeed, we analyzed longevity also from another perspective, looking at lifestyles, for example. As we've just learned, lifestyles are most important because if you have a healthy lifestyle, you can reduce the probability of developing chronic diseases. We had been told that over the past 10 years, we have been told that the past 10 years of each lives involve fighting against at least one chronic diseases, as, for example, heart and cardiovascular diseases, cancers, and neurodegenerative diseases, diabetes, and so on and so forth. So the last 10 years of our lives basically are spent fighting against such diseases. And as Dr. Apollone was saying, if you have a healthy lifestyle, well, you could do away with some 40% of the existing tumors. So you can reduce to 0 the risk of developing such tumors. So the same is true also for diabetes too. Indeed, a healthy lifestyle leads to some 90% of type 2 diabetes being avoided altogether. So you see that lifestyle has quite a bearing on longevity and health. Then, at a year of the Expo, we talked about the eradication of hunger. Looking at all the possibilities, we know that the world population will be as large as involving 9 billion people in 2050. We don't have additional land to grow food on, so we have to try and enhance our cultures. Because year on year, there is some 30% of the produce being lost because of stresses, as for example, water lack or the presence of pathogens. So if we could do away with all of this, we would have 30% more of produce. Or we might try, and there's going to be a lecture devoted to that tomorrow, we could try and interact with the intrinsic mechanism of photosynthesis, trying to modify those using the genome editing, the subject of Professor Pellicci's presentation. And that takes us to precision medicine 2015. Well, precision medicine has already been referred to. A conference was held on this subject, and this connects very nicely to the conference that we had the following year on the digital revolution, because precision medicine and the digital revolution are interconnected. In molecular biology labs devoting to the study of mankind, bacteria, and plants, there are at least a couple of IT experts, because the wealth of data that are produced, analyzing not just DNA, but, as Professor Pellicci was saying earlier on, the whole chain of involving RNA, proteins, the modifications of proteins, a wealth of data is generated. And then metabolomics within cells that are also metabolites, sugars, for example, and many other substances. So all these things can be studied through lipidomics. For example, you can study all the fats within the cell. And this generates another wealth of data. Such data are to be interconnected, and we cannot do that ourselves. Hence the need for bio-IT experts. But what you need first is high-capacity servers, hence the importance of big data. And now I'd like to go back to Watson. I told you about that computer that was learning. He was now in the second year of medicine, of medical school, when we heard about that. And last year, actually, he got his degree in medicine, and he could do something that was sounded very strange to me, actually, so much so that any of us would want it in the lab, because Watson could go through the literature, could read many papers. For example, the researcher would raise a question, and Watson had read all the literature on that specific subject and could extract many things, so much so that it would come to a couple of potential solutions. And then the researcher could test those solutions in the lab. So the assumptions that the Watson was putting forward could be further tested. Each of us could read one paper at a day, maximum, but the computer Watson could read all the existing literature, something quite extraordinary. So much so that he could come to all solutions. It is as if you could have some 50 postdoc students in your lab producing different assumptions. So this is not just used for researchers, but all this is also used by the industry whenever reference is made to 4.0. Obviously, this is what is involved. Well, in the future, all these data will also be used by general practitioners. That looking at the computer, GPs could have access to a wealth of information that could be used to treat individual patients. This picture is the picture of the audience, the picture of all of you, of all the people that have been attendance.
Of the many young people who have taken part in these conferences. Professor Bazzoli has always been part with the Professor Veronesi, Professor Tronchetti. All these people have always been present. Another picture of our fans, you can see Professor Veronesi with a group of students, who is the group of students led by Carlo Bucci. Thank you very much for your participation, Mr. Bucci. He has been very successful in his work. These students, together with their teachers, have taken part in our meetings with selected groups, changed every year. And these selected students paid a lot of attention. And then once they would go back home, they could speak about what they have learned with their relatives, with the other students. And this is the words which goes from mouth to mouth, and which is very, very important for us and for science. Very rapidly. Now I would like to move on to dealing with the topic, with this year's topic, the lives to come. With the opening lectures you have just heard, mine is the closing one, so the closing speaker, but let's start with tomorrow morning. Tomorrow morning we are going to discuss the values, first of all, with three speakers, Mrs. Kathleen Kennedy, Mrs. Helga Nowotny, and Dr. Giuseppe Testa. As you have heard, science progresses, but one part of it must follow suit. As we'll see tomorrow, Kathleen Kennedy will speak about the relationship between science and politics, and Helga Nowotny, will speak about the relationship between science and society, how society is forged by science and vice versa. And then Giuseppe Testa will speak about bioethics. There are so many things which follow under bioethics. Through genome editing, it is possible, for example, to modify one single gene also in the germline. But how is this used? How is it treated? Or how is it going to be treated in the future? Is it going to be possible? What are the genes which will be modified? Or what are the genes which we will not be able to modify? Are these disease genes? But genome editing is also used for plants. Now, at a European level and in the US, say, genome editing modified plants are to be are discussed. Are they to be considered as GMOs or not? So there are many things which follow under bioethics. Each university, each institution has a bioethics committee analyzing all the projects which are submitted. Then we're going to have another session on healthcare. Here we have 3 distinguished speakers as well. And here we're going to discuss medicine in 20 years. What is it that it's going to happen in 20 years' time? What are the drugs which will be produced then? Out of the 4 speakers, 2, Shriram Aradie, comes from Novartis, and Marco Cornell from Cavrion. Because in this field, the industry is of great importance, and they're going to provide us with their vision of the future. Then Alberto Mantovani will speak about his vision, about a challenge, really. How can the immunity system be modified so as to defeat tumors? And he is going to tell us something about a very interesting project. Then Ryan Kellogg, who comes from Stanford. At Stanford, they have a relevant project which is underway to try and understand how diseases are developed. They took 500 people, and these people have been monitored with microsensors to try and understand what they do in their lives and what happens, what is their lifestyle, to then compare it with what is their DNA sequence or their epigenome, to try and understand really what are the molecular processes at work in their bodies and how their lifestyle may affect them. And this goes back to the lecture by Elio Riboli, who is a very important epidemiologist who has coordinated the IC study, which I think started back in the 80s and which is still underway, which is still developing, which is under development, which is going to be continued. In this case, too, 500,000 people have been monitored according to their lifestyle. And then a certain number of parameters have been measured. And this has led to sound results which will be presented. When you are presented with results coming from carried out on 500,000 people, there is nothing more solid and sound than that. And some important recommendations will be issued by Elio Riboli. Then we are going to have 2 more presentations by Pierre Brown and Stephen Long. Again, we have the diet, which is always being discussed. But if we really want a good diet for us, we have to consider the primary products, what is the raw material used. So we are going to discuss how products coming from good plants can be developed. Of course, these plants should be resistant to pathogens and environmental stresses. And then Stephen Long, engineering crop photosynthesis for sustainable global food security. Professor Long will tell us something about this high-risk project, which, if it works well, is going to give us a very important result, because modifying photosynthesis may lead to incredible production results. And this will close the conference. And I hope you will be interested in all this. Now we're going to gather together for a cocktail, which is going to be offered in the main cloister. Thank you.
Scusate, un momento, perché sennò dimenticavo. I nostri partner. Senza i nostri partner non potremmo.
I was almost forgetting that nothing could be done without our partners. So we would like to acknowledge Novartis, Kedrion, Nestlé, Airbnb, and our Pirelli, and our media partners, Wired, Salute, and Link. And then I would like to thank all the speakers. I would like to thank the organizing committee and the program committee. And I hope I didn't leave out anyone.